Good morning, everybody. There has been a bit of a shakeup. With the new Imbue changes, you've got all sorts of different characters out there running around with Imbues, Arcane Archers and Tempests and Eldritch Knights and Dark Apostates. But one thing I have been getting questions about constantly has been the Warlock Imbue. You see, some of you might not know, but there actually is an Imbue in Warlock. For a quick recap, Imbue dice is basically something that adds on to your melee attacks. So if you attack a monster, or I guess if you use a ranged weapon, you're going to be adding additional damage onto those attacks. It's something that is in many different trees and many different classes. Well, Warlocks had an ability in Enlightened Spirit called Spiritual Retribution, and what it did is it added up to 3 d4s of additional light damage onto your attacks, ranged attacks, and Eldritch Blasts. This was very cool as an Enlightened Spirit Warlock, as it meant that you could have your aura constantly going out and adding the extra damage, and if you decided to melee attack something, it was also adding the extra damage. Bit of synergy there. However, with this change, it is now an Imbue, meaning that instead of being 3 d4s, it's now a d6, and every time you get more Imbue dice, it increases the number dramatically because you get 2d6s, 3d6s, 4d6s, 5. How many d6s can you get? And so I wanted to answer that question. How good is this ability? I think that in pretty much all cases, as an Enlightened Spirit, it's going to be strictly better than it was before. Before you were getting 3 d4s, now out of the tree, you're going to be picking up 4 d6s total, and that's not including anything you can get out of your Epic Destinies, which it's very easy to get an extra 6 Imbue dice right out of Epic Destinies, pick up an extra 3 out of feats, some out of filigrees, some out of set items. As an Enlightened Spirit, I think this is an absolute no-brainer, a direct upgrade, and a fantastic, very, very good ability. If you want to play Melee Warlock, if you just want to play a Enlightened Spirit style caster, you're going to be having a great time. However, this video is about how do we make this do damage on the Blaster Warlock. Is it worth it to add all of those extra d6s to a standard Blaster Warlock? So I decided to do some testing, and I made a character that could absolutely maximize it, which is a racial completionist. Now this is actually important because in the Drow tree, there was Imbue dice added, so you can gain additional Imbue dice. With the extra Imbue dice from the Drow tree and the Imbue from Enlightened Spirit, spending most of my points in Tainted Scholar, where you get the extra critical multiplier on all of your spellcasts, I set out with the goal in mind of trying to maximize the damage and to find out, as a Blaster Warlock, is it better to use the Imbue for blasting, or is it not better? For those of you who just want that answer right away, it is not better. It is definitely worse. I would not recommend it. I tried it out, and I think that while the damage is nice to have, it suffers from the flaw of time. So basically, as a blaster, you get loads of spell critical chance and loads of spell power. And while you could just stand there and blast away, you have extra abilities you can use, such as Eldritch Wave, which is the highest damage ability that Warlocks even get. Eldritch or Arcane Tempest for an incredibly powerful AoE damage effect. Any of the Dragon Breaths from Draconic Incarnation. Any of the spells from Primal Avatar. Ruin and Greater Ruin. All of these spells take time to cast, and they don't get your Imbue dice on them, which means that if you decide to invest into the Imbue dice, you're not getting anything on these spells, and you will want to be casting them, because as cool as Eldritch Blast is, it's not 40,000 damage Dragon Breath. It's not 60,000 damage Greater Ruin. And those things are really, really good because they can just let you pop monsters and completely get rid of them. So as a result, you really do want to focus on having these secondary things as a Warlock Blaster. You might be blasting, but you're not just going to be passively blasting. Now granted, if you are somebody who wants to do exclusively passively blasting and never really touch any of the actual spells or buttons on the keyboard, I could see the argument for using something like this, but at that point, you'd be better off just playing as like a melee Enlightened Spirit and meleeing stuff to get more uses out of the Imbue dice. I managed to get my character up to 20 bonus Imbue dice, adding an extra 21 d6s per Eldritch Blast, and I still found that I would much prefer having Eldritch Wave, which I couldn't fit into this build if I wanted the critical multiplier, which was more impactful, and I also was unable to get the extra 8% spell critical chance for all of my spells, which would be dramatically more useful for the Ruin, Greater Ruin, and everything else. At the end of the day, the Imbue is extremely powerful for an Enlightened Spirit, and very good for a Melee Warlock, and very good for a Ranged or Inquisitive or Thrower Warlock, but it is not good as a Blaster Warlock. So, should you use this as a Blaster? No, I don't recommend you do. I think you should stick to the standard 41 points in Tainted Scholar and like 35 or 37 points in Soul Eater. Just go with that. I think that is the best route possible. But if you want to play around with it as an Enlightened Spirit, just go for it. Enlightened Spirit is very strong right now, especially with the Imbue, and I think it's only going to be getting better in the future, especially with the new Warlock buffs on the horizon. For those of you that don't know, with the next update, Update 58, there are going to be massive Warlock buffs coming to the Warlock class, and it's going to make the character significantly stronger. To give you a little bit of context, you'll see some confusing math out there. There's different changes of the base damage and the spell power scaling and a whole bunch of stuff. So to break down, in all cases, this is a buff for all types of Warlocks doing all types of damage that's going to be coming out, unless the numbers change, obviously, between the first Lemania and the actual release. But it is a buff for all Warlocks in all cases, the smallest buff being a 4% buff to the Cone and the Aura effects. It's only 4%. It's still a buff, but it is a minor buff because they were very, very good blast styles. With the Chain picking up a additional 40% damage over what it had before. So if you really liked Chain, but you hated that it did so much less damage than Cone, well, now they're the same damage. And you have the Enervating Shadow picking up almost 80% increased damage, allowing you to have a very powerful single target, and it really helps out with Warlocks who are trying to do raids, especially since Enervating Shadow now gives you access to that really high, dense, single target damage tool. So it's a pretty good buff for Warlocks, and I'm very excited to see it. But as excited as I am, I do have to say that this Imbue thing, not the greatest for the Blaster Warlocks. I think I might try out the dual wielding with the Imbue and trying all that and seeing how it goes. But again, that's going to be a bit of a wait and see here as I investigate what the other options are with this character. But I do want to pass it over to me with the build so you can know how to not build a character like this. So the real question is, how do you perform endgame DPS as a Warlock? I have done a lot of experiments with this, trying to figure out what is the best thing, and Lemania coming up was also very helpful to let me test out a few different things. And I've kind of come to some conclusions, especially when it comes to the Imbue, which is one of the new things that you can get out of Warlock, allowing you to add extra damage to your, or light damage to your attacks. Now this already existed before, but it was 3d4s, and now it's based on your Imbue dice, which can be a lot higher than 3d4s. So I wanted to see how this would work if I was doing an in-game blaster and how that was going to perform. This was also done with some of the, I did some testing with the new Warlock changes that were posted on the DDO forums as per Lemania. If you got to this part of the video and you're not sure, just a quick and dirty, nothing in Warlock went down in damage. Cone is about a 3% damage increase. Aura is about a 3% damage increase. The Chain is about a 40% damage increase from where it was, so it's actually a major Chain buff. The single target is also a pretty large increase. And finally, Enervating Shadow is disgusting. It adds so much more damage. And now if you want to be a single target Warlock, you will want to take Enervating Shadow for raids and other situations like that, where it really does add up a lot of damage. Now I'm going to do a pretty high-level summary of this character. This is a racial completionist, so you want to be looking at this if you're kind of already at that point, but still, the points will still stand. This is my Warlock stream right now. 97 charisma, goes up to 100 or 100 in Reaper mode. Reasonably tanky using medium armor currently. Gets again more stats when I'm actually in Reaper mode and with my spells active. Spell critical chance hovering somewhere around like 50% because I got to have cold and light and force, and I'm trying to manage multiple different things. But the crit multi is pretty good, and you get a lot of consistent hits. So it's just missing out on one spell isn't the biggest of deals.
Receive.
As far as, oh, somebody followed. I'm not even streaming. That's hilarious. As far as the feats go, Embodiment of Law is good. This character is, in fact, lawful, which allows you to get the extra Imbue dice on top of that, and also grabbing Crush Weakness, because Crush Weakness gives you extra damage versus the Helpless, which this character can make things helpless constantly. I just realized there's going to be a lot of noise in the background here, so I might turn down the noise real quick. Yeah, so that way it's just like less people fighting stuff in the background. On top of that, you use Ruin and Greater Ruin. This character does in fact use those because it is very powerful on a Warlock. You basically don't need any of your spell points, so you want to cast as many spells as you can and then get back to blasting. So the way this character works, 15-second cooldown on Dragon Breath, 15-second cooldown on Ruin, 15-second cooldown on Greater Ruin, 20 seconds on Thunder Snow. So you kind of work on a 20-second cooldown rate, where every 20 seconds you Thunder Snow, Ruin, Greater Ruin, Dragon Breath, and then you get back into just blasting while intermittently throwing out your, the Consume here. That adds the debuff, Taint the Aura. That's pretty much all you use it for, is the debuff Taint the Aura. You don't really use it for anything else here. It's just nice to get the physical and magical resistance rating reduction. So that's kind of the gist there. The feats, rest of it's like pretty straightforward in terms of like the spell casting feats. You know, you're picking up the spell focuses for enchantment. You don't really need evocation because I have the past lives. I got the sorcerer past lives, so it's not a big deal. And you really want to get the enchantment feats there are a little bit more important. Grabbing the metamagic feats as well, going to be able to picking up some of those stats there, so it's kind of important. As far as the legendary feat, I went with Sign of the Plane of Water because this is a cold warlock, and also, so it gives the crit there, and then also it gives Imbue dice, which again, it gives you the light damage, which is kind of cool. Spells, very standard warlock spells, don't really have a lot to talk about here. Nothing really exciting. But the enhancements. So this is where it kind of becomes difficult. I'm using Enlightened Spirit, so I've got the Spiritual Retribution here, as well as the Medium Armor Proficiency, and Eldritch Burst. During Heroic leveling, Eldritch Burst feels pretty good. In Epics, I never use this. I don't want to be in melee range that often with this character. I'm not as tanky as I would like to be. And also, it only adds 1d6 of damage, so it's really not that big of a deal when I can just blast twice. Also, that the animation is a little bit longer. If you have an aura, you can go between attacking and doing this pretty quickly, but the Eldritch Blast has a long wind-up, so stopping your Eldritch Blast to use Burst is a little expensive time-wise. So I didn't really use this in Epics at all. It was only good for the leveling process, so you can probably take that point out. And then this also gives you access to Medium Armor Proficiency, which is not bad, as well as Aura of Menace, which is a -2 to all enemies' saving throws, which does actually help out quite a bit when you're trying to do a lot of crowd control at the end game. It's basically +2 to all your DCs is a good way to think about it. So the question is, how good is the Spiritual Retribution, and do you need it? So I did a couple tests here because I really wanted to know. And this character is a racial completionist. I pick up 2 Imbue dice here out of the Drow. I pick up Imbue dice out of Draconic Incarnation, and I get the Imbue dice out of the Primal Avatar. This is a little bit harder for me because, unfortunately, the Mantle of the Sky, this doesn't affect your Eldritch Blast. Eldritch Blast is not a lightning spell. Or a cold spell, or a sonic spell, so it actually doesn't work. Instead, this only procs on Thunder Snow, this procs on Dragon Breath, but doesn't proc on anything else. And with a 5-second cooldown on each, I'm not getting as good of a use out of it as I would like, which is one of the big detrimental factors to the to using the Imbue, because you want to get the extra Imbue dice. Whereas if I'm not using the Imbue, I'm instead just taking Attune the Arcane, which works on everything that I do, because it just goes offensive spells. And then you can use Inevitable for the extra damage. Alternatively, you could also use Exalted Angel instead, because Exalted Angel does the similar thing where it applies to all spells, so that is also an option. So both of those would be better than Primal Avatar in terms of the damage component. But then there's the second part where, because I'm taking Spiritual Retribution for the damage, you really want to be picking up some other stuff. You want to be grabbing the Tainted Scholar for all the crit multi, because we're going in for the damage. So we've got the Eldritch Blast here, we've got the Eldritch Blast dice here for maximizing the damage, and the Pack dice, which leaves you the problem where you don't take the good stuff out of Soul Eater. I don't have Stricken with the vulnerability stacking, so you're reliant on somebody else to do that. You don't pick up the crit here. You don't pick up the crit here, so you're down 8% on crit of where you would otherwise be. And you don't get Eldritch Wave, which is pretty much one of the best abilities that Warlock gets. This is as much damage as Dragon Breath, and it's on an 8-second cooldown, and it has no cost. So it's very, very powerful, and you have to give up all of that to get this Spiritual Retribution here. So the question is, after doing that and doing this, and also getting the gear set, which is not necessarily cheap, it's not too bad. I'm currently using the Gloves of the Glacier and the Braces of the Glacier, just because I need Cold and Electric, and even Sonic, because it does proc off of some of my spells, so it's not the worst. I do have a full crafted Dinosaur Bone Ring, Gem of Many Facets. Oh, I should have set this up. It was supposed to be Elder's Focus on the gem. I got to re-roll this. But Elder's Focus and the Elder's Gem of Many Facets for the extra crit chance and damage. And then on top of that, Dinosaur Scale, because I wanted to use the Walking Ancestors set for the spell DCs and Imbue dice and ability scores. So you have to use that. And then the Dinosaur Plate is pretty much the only way to get around getting all the good stats, although this gets you Sacred spell DCs, which is quite good. To do all of this, the gear is kind of expensive and a little time consuming to come by. However, with all of that being said, this gives me a absolute total of 19 Imbue dice, which is not bad. It's reasonably good. The amount of extra damage I get is noticeable. And here is what I will say. As somebody who maximized all this out, got every Imbue dice I could everywhere in the tree, and has this, and is a racial completionist for the Drow, I would say it is a comparable amount of damage, but it is not better. I think the Imbue is very, very good if you happen to be an Enlightened Spirit. If you are taking Celestial Spirit, if you are a melee, applying this to your melee attacks, I think it's actually much, much stronger than if you are playing as the character that I'm doing here. The main issue is time. I have many spells. White Dragon Breath. I have Thunder Snow. You have the Eldritch Ball you can cast. Evard's Black Tentacles. I've got Freezes and Absolute Zero. I have the Stun from Hold Monster Mass. All right? All of the... And Ruin, Greater Ruin. All of these buttons take time where you're not blasting. And the blast is the only thing that takes your Spiritual Retribution. This extra damage, the Imbue. So doing 20 d6s of light damage on every strike is very powerful. But because it doesn't work on any of your spells, every time you cast any of these abilities, which are very powerful and you want to use all the time, you always want to be using Thunder Snow. Because if I use Thunder Snow, I hit a guy for, what was that, like almost 20,000 damage. So that is very, very good, and I want to be using that as much as I can. So the end result is it's a more passive playstyle, and you benefit from having fewer abilities, which makes your character slightly worse. And also, I happen to have the Imbue dice from Drow Elf and not really getting anything else. My conclusion is, for an endgame DPS Warlock, I don't think it's a good idea to do the Imbue. I think the Imbue is great if you are an Enlightened Spirit, if you're already spending your points there, but the traditional 41 points in Tainted Scholar, but going tier 5 of Soul Eater, picking up the crit, pick up the wave, get the Supreme Hunger, and get Eldritch Seeker to max out these abilities. You don't worry about the uptime of your Eldritch Blast, whereas this, you're investing too much into it. The damage is sort of comparable. I actually think it's not too bad on the sustained, but the burst is much worse. You're giving up on 8% crit chance. You're giving up on a lot of spell points, or spell power, because you get more spell power out of the Soul Eater tree. And you have to focus some of your gear towards the Imbue dice, whereas you could swap out of the Walking Ancestor set and use something else. So again, I think that in general, the gearing isn't super worth it, especially considering you kind of have to use the Walking Ancestor set for this, which means I don't recommend using the Red Dragon plate or the Red Dragon scale armor, not because it's bad, but because it's expensive. It's hard to come by. Most people can't get it. I still don't have mine because I don't have enough Dragon scales, even though I run a reasonable amount of Vault of Night. But it just takes a long time to acquire. And so while it is good and it is best in slot, I'm not currently recommending it just because the time invested. If you are the person who has that many scales, there are builds out there you can find. But for my purposes, it's a lot of extra work for like a marginal damage increase. But I would say it is not worth it to invest into the Spiritual Retribution, and you should invest your time and energy into something else if you want to be a Blaster DPS Warlock. For example, this character, instead, I could take all the points out of Enlightened Spirit, fill up on Soul Eater. Instead of being a Drow Elf, I could be a Dragonborn, picking up extra caster levels for all of your spells. I could get the cold spells out of Dragonborn. I could be a Tiefling, picking up tons of defenses. The elemental resistances are huge, getting it based on your level, among other things, or even getting the fire immunity bypass, as we talked about before, and going back to Fiend and grabbing all the fire stuff. You could be or still as a Dragonborn, just getting all the extra DCs as well, which is very, very powerful. Heck, you could even be an Aasimar if you wanted, or a human, just picking up healing amplification and just generally more feats, being tougher, having more hit points. So there's a lot of options there. I think that the Spiritual Retribution, as it stands, is great as an Enlightened Spirit, but not great as a Blaster. So I'm going to not recommend this from testing, my personal experience, from the play experience, and from playing here on testing out a couple of things on Lemania. I think that the Soul Eater will give you better bang for your buck because you've got 8% extra crit chance, so you're losing 19 d6s, but you're getting crit chance. And on top of that, you are able to grab the Eldritch Wave, which is really, really valuable. Now, you might be wondering, okay, but why don't you just get rid of Tainted Scholar and use Soul Eater instead if this is so good? And the problem is, this is very powerful. Eldritch Blast damage is really, really good. The DCs are nice. You need Heretical Lore because this is a huge amount of spell critical damage, as well as Tainted Lore. That's 50% spell critical damage. That's just so integral to the build. And with the new changes to Warlock, you kind of have to have Enervating Shadow in your build if you want to be a DPS, because this is a major increase to your damage on a single target. It basically makes you a raid boss killing machine. So you want to take that. So as a result, you're always using the Tainted Scholar tree. So it's not really feasible to keep this and then go into the Soul Eater. The second thing that also makes it less valuable, again, for the Blasters, as I said, this is amazing as an Enlightened Spirit if you're actually using the tree, and it is amazing especially if you're melee or ranging an Inquisitive Enlightened Spirit, a melee Enlightened Spirit, two-handed fighter, whatever it is, but as a Blaster, not so much. But the second thing is the changes they've made to Eldritch Blast in general. For those that don't know, coming up in the next update, there's buffs coming to Warlock, in the form of pact damage now being 1d6 instead of 1d4. That is a 50%, well, not a 50%, but it's like a 38% increase in pact damage, and then your blast damage going from D6 to D8. That increase means that the emphasis of these extra D6s is a smaller portion of your overall damage as well, which means that giving up on 20 D6s might seem like a lot, but now my character, I can show you on the stats here, that is going to be offset by the fact that I have 16 D8s and 24 D6s of damage already built into my build, and instead I can grab more spell power and more spell crits to amplify this, especially from the Soul Eater. If I don't have anyone in the party, just the 20% damage from Stricken Form is already enough to completely offset that. But if somebody else is already using this, the 5% crit chance here, the 3% crit for 8%, and then this would put me over the top, allowing my character to go from 53 cold and 47 light up to 61 cold and 55% light crit. And then if I actually had the right gem of many facets that I don't have here, I would be able to have an extra 6% crit going over 70%, which would be very, very good, and something that, would really increase the damage of the character compared to where I am today. So as I said, end result, this is Spiritual Retribution. Very cool, amazing for the actual Enlightened Spirit. Blaster, don't do it. It is not worth it. I've done the testing, and I don't think it's going to be what you want. There is technically an exception to this, and the exception is the Shirati Champion Tree. This is the one thing I did not test because I assume it's probably still going to be bad. Prism now deals increased damage based on the amount of Imbue dice that you have. So you can get these things that does more damage based on the amount of Imbue dice you have. That's kind of cool. The problem is it still is only a 7% chance to proc on spells. So as when you're blasting, it's just almost never going, to come up. So I still wouldn't really worry about it, even though you're blasting and kind of going over the AoE. So it did not increase the damage substantially, but I think Warlock still has a lot of very good options. The new Warlock buffs are going to bump up Warlock quite a bit. I don't think it's going to take over everything, but it's definitely going to be better for your general endgame play, specifically because Warlock never struggled for AoE damage. Having a Warlock in your party in R10s is great. They throw down an Evards and just kind of wash everything in debuffs and AoE damage. Warlocks are fantastic to have around and generally fit into every R10 party. And they're also not bad in raids because they're one of the few spellcasters that doesn't have mana problems, so they can just keep blasting the entire time and dealing incremental range damage. With the huge buffs, you're now getting 50% more single target than you had before in the form of Enervating Shadow, which is a massive buff. It's important to note that this 50% also only scales your base damage and your pact. It does not scale the Spiritual Retribution. Another nail in the coffins for Spiritual Retribution as a Blaster Warlock. So please be the takeaway. Spiritual Retribution, not going to be the one for Blaster Warlock. That's what I've learned, and that's what I hope you kind of take away from this. I'll just do a quick once over of the gear before I end this thing. New Goggles of Dusk, fantastic. Gives you the Evocation, Insightful Evocation, and Quality Spell Focus. Ignore the Wisdom, it doesn't matter. The other stats are just amazing. Walking Ancestor set here. I've got Festive Charisma and the Epic Litany of the Dead in here. You also notice I have Insightful Constitution. I couldn't fit Insightful Constitution anywhere in the build, so you will need an augment for that. Cloak of the Walking Ancestor Shroud. I've just got a Sapphire of Resistance for the extra 10 to all saving throws. Using the Elder set, because the Elder set, this item is basically useless. It gives mana, and that's pretty much all I get, and I guess Magical Sheltering. The big deal is the artifact bonus to spell critical chance and damage. That's actually a huge amount of extra damage for the endgame. And then the Gem of Many Facets here, the reason why this is actually very nice, once I get the right set bonuses, is that the Radiance and Radiance lore is somewhere I couldn't fit anywhere in the build, and being able to craft it is nice. And then Insightful Fortification, also important, because the armor that I'm using is the Dragon Scale Plate. You can't get this at all from, you can get Fortification, but it's really annoying because the other stats are good. So I have a Heavy Fortification Sapphire for 100%, and then this 74 or 76 actually gives me enough Fortification to be protected from critical hits. So it's kind of a cool combination there. The Dire Bear Belt, because it's just a good item. Also, I've got another winter item here, the Ring of Winter's Chill. This is the only this is the best cold item I could fit into this build. It's hard to get the cold items in here because there's so many other, it's hard to get like the cold items that I need with the cold spell power. And the Force is not that bad because it's helpful with Evards, it's helpful with Arcane Tempest, it's helpful with Ruin, Greater Ruin. And it gives me the 2-piece set for the physical resistance rating for a little bit of tank. I have my Dinosaur Bone Ring here with Constitution as well as some crit chance, or crit damage for cold and light, and then profane spell DCs. On top of that, we're running the Glacier set. Now the Glacier set, the bracers aren't amazing, but the Fire Shield Cold is nice to have on all the time because I don't have access to that as a Cold Warlock. I get the Cold Absorption as well, so I get Cold and Fire Absorption. So this item is actually a lot better than I initially thought, with some augments for the Healing Amplification and the Drop of Tea, which is an item that makes your spells cost less and gives you some more spell power when you take damage. And then mostly because this gives me the artifact bonus here to Cold, Sonic, and Electrical's crit chance. Important notice, this artifact bonus to a specific stacks with the artifact bonus to just spell critical chance. They stack together because one is specific and one is general, so they stack, which is very fun. It doesn't tell you that, but that is how it works. And then this one gives quality glaciation as well, which is not too bad. I also have Pamura's Memento in here. This is an augment that you can get by converting the ring Pamura's Memento from the Hunter Be Hunted raid into a augment that gives you 5% insightful bonus to critical chance with every spell. So very, very good here. My boots, I'm using the Sunken Slippers because I needed quality charisma somewhere. And this gives insightful and quality potency, which just works for all of the spells that I cast. Because this character uses healing spell power for healing, you've got cold, you've got lightning spell power that comes off of thunder, snow, kinetic, everything else. It just really gives you that extra potency, which is nice. And I can put a move speed item in there, which is very good. In fact, for the armor, for this one, it's expensive to craft, but it gives me the Void Scale and the Void Fang, so I can have medium with the exceptional bonus to spell critical chance and increased spell power, and Sacred bonus to DCs, so my DCs can feel pretty good. As far as the rest of it, I've got Resplendent Fury here, just because Insightful Radiance and Radiance lore, this is the best place in the game to get it, and it's really good, so I have that. You're pretty much always using this on a Warlock, so just use this item. And then finally, we have the Dinosaur Bone Morningstar, which I have crafted in here as the Iridescent Scale for some just universal spell power for anything that I'm missing. I've got the Melt Fang, the Claw for Charisma, and then the Flame Horn, so I can have Ash and reduce enemies' magic resistance rating. As far as the filigrees go, the last thing to kind of go over here, I'm currently using two different pieces. So I have the Keeper of the Curse set, because the 5-piece set gives +3 packed dice, as well as the DC. The packed dice is 3 D6s per Eldritch Blast, which is a lot of extra damage, on top of the fact that this set is actually fairly good. On top of that, because I wanted to max out imbues, I'm also using the Snakebite and Grandfather's Shield set with all Constitution. Makes me a little bit tankier, and it is the 3-piece Snakebite set that gives 2 imbue dice. So I'll be using +2 Constitution, +1 Constitution, and then the ring also has the +2 Constitution in it. It gives me 5 Constitution and 2 imbue dice. It's not that bad for the defense and for the imbue. Again, you wouldn't use that on the actual set, so I would be replacing that later. Probably just go with the standard auto set for some more spell DCs, because right now with my stats, I'm at 104 in Reaper mode. That goes up to 111, I think. And I'd rather just pick up the extra 2 DCs and get a little bit higher. We got Frozen Wanderer set because it gives you extra crit chance. And then I'm just doubling down on the Charisma set. So I've got the Charisma Sanctified for Reverberation and 2 Hell and Back and Embraced by Light. And again, same thing here. We've got the Curse Keeper, the Reverberation, and the Embraced by Light and everything else to get the extra damage. So that's how I currently have this built. As I said, I don't think that you should kind of go this route, but it's just something in case you're curious about how I had it going on. You can now see that. So thank you for watching. If you like what you saw or you want to try this out yourself, as I said, I don't recommend doing this as a blaster, but if you want, Enlightened Spirit is so good with it. The main reason, if you are still at this point, you don't know why this is good as Enlightened Spirit, but not as a blaster. As I said, as a blaster, I have so many spells I'm using, and I only get the value when I blast. When I do this, I get the value. When I don't do that, I don't get the value, and I spend a lot of time not doing that. Whereas the Enlightened Spirit, the aura is a passive. It will always be dealing the damage every 2 seconds, whether you are trying or not. So the Imbue dice is always valuable, and if you happen to be actually using melee weapons and attacking people, it's even better because this applies to melee attacks. If you use a cleave, if you use an attack, you're still getting the Imbue dice. It holds the value and it's much better. But as a blaster, I'm going to say give it a pass and just have fun with your blasty Warlock in general and enjoy yourself. Anyways, that's all I have for you today, so thank you for watching. I hope you learned something about this. I had a bit of a learning experience here on my journey. And yeah, enjoy Warlock. It's really fun. The buffs are coming out, so it should be good with update 58, and it's still good right now. So get Warlock in. If you want to see more content like this, and you want to see the actual testing and how I do this, make sure to go check out my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Strimtom. I stream all day. This is what I do. This is my job. I stream and I make videos and stuff. So as I said, if that's something that you want to learn more about, check it out. And that's all I got. So thank you for watching. Have a good day, and brush your teeth, because if you don't, your teeth are going to fall out, and that's not good.